the menu items of events still happening across the world. Really what Measurement Month is a whole month of free webinars, sessions, breakfast workshops in previous years, which unfortunately due to COVID was rare this year. And it's where AMEC and AMEC members across the world share best practices from a communication and public relations measurement perspective. So my name is Francois van Dijk. For those of you who don't know me, I run operations at Ornico. I'm also a AMEC board member, the only one from Africa, and then I also serve on the AVEs Measurement Council. So for those of you who don't know who AMEC is the world's global PR measurement, communications, measurement and evaluation organization. It's the biggest one. It was founded in 1996. And we've got membership in about 86 countries across the world now. So what we're trying to do through the organization is not only develop better measurement practices, but also promote these to the betterment of the whole industry. We've got several free resources which I'll share with you. The evaluation framework, which we'll look at today. There's the measurement maturity mapper. We're discussing the updated Barcelona Principles today as well. And then also, if you would like to study further from a measurement perspective, we've got online colleges which you can attend and all of that. So today, I think what I'm going to try and do is just show you some of the basics. You will need to do your homework afterwards, obviously, and go and explore these resources further. I like to refer to measurement as a elephant, really. A lot of people are intimidated by it. Sometimes poor measurement practices are the elephant in the room, but I think the biggest example for me is that measurement can be like an elephant, and the old saying goes, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And I think that is how you need to approach your journey on better measurement. You're not going to be able to do everything at once. I mean, a lot of people think I'm an expert in this. I'm only really a beginner myself. We learn as we go along. New methodologies come around, new principles come around. So it's a continuously evolving and betterment of the process. And I think what is really scary, and this research is about a year old, is that the Fortune 100 C-suite survey saw up to 96% of business leaders believing their marketing and PR teams were unwilling or unable to improve their return on investment. And this is really a scary statistic. I mean, if we're being seen as a cost center, not as a value add center, that's problematic for us as practitioners. So the big trick is at the end of the day to start proving your value and doing that from a strategic perspective as well. But let's look at a quick history of how communications measurement started. In fact, the first recorded evaluation of media as we know it today was actually done by George Washington back in the 1700s, when he was looking at competing politicians and what they were saying in the media. And then when we look at the media monitoring industry, that started developing in the mid-1850s when a Polish news vendor called Ornico realized he was selling a lot of newspapers to actors on the West End who came to buy all the papers the next day after they debuted a new play to read the reviews. And he actually started selling them clipbooks of all the commentary in the papers. And I love this little picture here from 1898 from the old Bureau-Loose. They still exist today, a monitoring company. So even by 1898, you had a lot of ladies scanning through the newspapers looking for relevant coverage for clients. So it's a very old industry. The scary thing for me is when I started my career in the 1990s in corporate communications, it didn't look any different from 100 years before, which is quite scary. But likely to say in the last 25 years, this industry has grown from strength to strength, and a lot of new innovations has changed a lot of things. Even by 60 years ago, we saw organizations like Feedback being established, which exists today. They just had their annual summit about a week ago, which is the International Association of Media Monitoring Companies. And it wasn't just newspapers which they started monitoring. As the broadcast industry really took off with television and all of that in the 1960s, we saw broadcast monitoring happening. Obviously, with the explosion of social media the last 15, 20 years, we've seen that becoming a factor. And that is really where organizations like AMEC came from. There was so many different kind of methods and methodologies, and a lot of it was really not well proven, and they started establishing a way forward, and particularly looking at how all of this media and more really needs to be measured and evaluated. But I'll go back to breakfast. This is one of my favorite stories. I mean, a traditional, what they would call a traditional English breakfast, except that the typical bacon and eggs that we know today was a PR campaign from the 1920s and 30s. The pork farmers in the US went to a gentleman called Edward Louis Benet, who was considered one of the founding fathers of the modern public relations industry. And they came to him with a problem. They weren't selling a lot of pork products. Beef was cheap. People were eating eggs and muffins for breakfast. And they came to him with, how can he help them to sell more pork? So Benet did a study with about 3,000 doctors in the US. All of them agreed that you need a hearty breakfast to start the day, and then he positioned bacon with eggs as the perfect hearty breakfast to start your day off. And well, the rest is history. Today we all know about bacon and eggs. Another one of his famous campaigns was the Lucky Strike cigarettes in the 1930s, who came to him and said, half of our target market is not using our products. Women don't smoke. How can you help us? It was at the time when the ladies in the US were protesting to get the right to vote. So what he did was hire a few models as all these women were marching to Capitol Hill in Washington. And as they got to the entrance to hand over their grievances, these models took out their Lucky Strikes with all the media present and lighted their torches of emancipation, as they called it. So interesting stories there from back in the day as the industry started. But around this time, obviously a lot of clients of these early, what they used to call publicists, wanted to know from the publicist, okay, you're getting me in the newspaper and I'm not paying for advertising. So what's the worth of this, you need to come up with a methodology to show us. So what a lot of them obviously did was, even in the early 30s, was look at the size of an ad and how much that ad would have cost to place in the newspapers. And if you equate an article to that and you use the advertising rate card, you could calculate what is called an advertising value equivalent. And then they equated the coverage they generated to the ad space which would have been spent to buy it. Now, that is where we get AVEs from. And AVEs, as we know it today, which is a measurement a lot of people still use, was already in use by the 40s, but the first warnings by the big PR associations globally were already issued in 1949, because they believed that it would do a lot of damage to the credibility of public relations and communication. And that brings us to a question that a lot of people always ask me: how much is a tweet worth? You know, we know how to calculate an advertising value equivalent for media coverage in a newspaper, but how does it work on social media? Is it, you know, cost per 1,000 for followers, and if 3 people engage with it, you divide it by the 3 and multiply it by whatever you want to get a value? No, it's not. It's all relative, and I'll show you. Here's a tweet by Oprah Winfrey. All it said was, eat bread, lose weight. What? Come join me, Weight Watchers. Would anyone like to take a guess, maybe in the chat comments, how much this was worth? I know how much this was worth. It was worth $150 million. That's how much Weight Watchers' market value shot up within the next 2 days after she tweeted it. As she owns 10% of Weight Watchers, that was worth a cool $15 million to her. And then let's look at this one from Associated Press. Breaking 2 explosions in the White House and Barack Obama is injured. Now, the Associated Press is obviously a very well-respected news agency, but I'm sure you can't recall a bomb explosion in the White House. And there wasn't one, because Syrian hijackers took over AP's Twitter account and posted this. Immediately, the stock markets had $139 billion wiped out. That was the impact of one tweet. It recovered very quickly again because people realized it was fake news. But that is the kind of impact a single tweet can have. It's not worth 20 Rand. It could be worth $150 million, or it can cost you billions. And I think it's a factor of SOS communication. That's how we run our campaigns. And it's a term which my colleague who's in the British communications, government communications, Alex Aiken, called sending out stuff, because we send out a lot of stuff to the media and hope something happens. And that is one of our biggest problems, really, because we don't know what we want to achieve. And let's look at a definition of communication, because we tend to forget that as communicators a lot. It's a two-way process of reaching mutual understanding, in which participants not only exchange information, use ideas and feelings, but also create and share meaning. Very important to remember a two-way process. Professor Jim McNamara, who's one of AMEC's academic members, and he's considered probably the biggest expert in the world when it comes to communications measurement, did a study about 5 years ago. And this was in markets like the US, the UK, Australia, so relatively well-developed markets. And what he found, and he literally interviewed a few thousand communicators, and what he found was about 95% of communication by organizations is focused on speaking. Now, I can tell you, if I spend 95% of my time speaking to my wife and I only listen to her 5% of the time, that's not a good relationship, and I'll be in deep trouble. But yet we as organizations do this quite a lot. And I think that is where the importance of listening comes to. We need to listen to what's happening out there and respond to it. There's also the old saying that says that's why God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, because you need to listen a bit more. Now, with all of this confusion and sending out stuff and AVEs, the industry came together in 2010. And at that stage, AMEC membership was present in about 22 countries. And they created the regional iteration of the Barcelona Principles, which is globally recognized as the guiding principles for best practices. So why are these principles important? Because it firstly sets a framework, it helps with the alignment, and it becomes the basis for measurement and evaluation programs. And like I mentioned earlier, some of the biggest institutions in the world support these and work around this. So the principles saw an update in 2015, and then we had an update about 2 months ago, which is the third iteration. And I'm happy to say, if you go and look at the links I'll share with you later, you can now find the principles in 25 languages. So it is quite a global effort. And why did we update it again? I mean, we've seen the world change dramatically this year, but even before that, issues like Black Lives Matter, the context, all of that changed very much as the world is changing quickly. So I'm going to briefly mention some of the old principles. They're still very much the same, but updated for 2020. When the original principles were established, it stressed the importance of goal setting and measurement. And where we are today is that measurable goals is an absolute prerequisite to communication, planning, measurement, and evaluation. And this is probably the most important thing which I can ask you to take out of today. I'm amazed at how many campaigns still don't have a specific goal. And when I talk about a specific goal, I'm talking about SMART goals, not just creating a buzz around your brand. That is not a goal. A SMART goal is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. And I'll show you some examples. If we look at some possible objectives of a public relations or communication plan, to attract new customers, or to create company and product awareness, or it could be crisis management or reputation management, or it could be customer relations management. So these are all very nice goals. Now we've got a goal here: attract new customers and improve profitability or product awareness. Now I can walk out my front door and tell a guy walking past me in the street about my product, and I've created product awareness. I've achieved my goal, and that's why we need to make it much smarter. So compare these goals and make it a little bit smarter. If we say we want to increase customers by 20% in 6 months, or we want to increase our Facebook engagement by 20% in 1 year, or we want 5,000 downloads of our product brochure in 90 months. Now we've got a very specific objectives, and we can track against that objectives. And the reality is, the long and the short of it, if we don't know how success looks like, how do we know that we've gotten there? And that is why a goal is really so important. Principle 2, where we started in 2010, measuring the effect on outcomes is preferred to measuring outputs. And today we say measurement and evaluation should identify outputs, outcomes, and potential impact. So we know what outputs are. So outputs is obviously clip counts that you may be getting in an analysis report. So it's like how many items of media coverage appeared this month. What was the reach from an audience perspective? What was the kind of messages contained in those posts? How many tweets did we send out? If we had an event, how many people attended the event? So those are what we call outputs. And unfortunately, this is where a lot of our measurement normally stops. Okay, we had 30 articles this month and reached 100 people. So that is an output, but we must take it further and look at the outcomes. Now, here's some examples of outcomes. There's much more, and if we look at the framework later, there is really a myriad of different kind of metrics that we can look at. So how many of our followers that engage with our content? If you've got 1 million followers and 1 person engages with it, it's a very low rate. If you've got 100 followers but 50 of them engage with it, it's very good. So what is the outcome? How many views did we get? Did we increase our awareness? Is there positive social media commentary? Did we create leads from this if that was our objective? So we need to look at what these ultimately would be. Principle 3, originally, the effect on business results can and should be measured where possible. Business results being money. In 2015, it was updated to organizational performance can and should be measured where possible, because the reality is it's not always about the money. Say, for instance, we want to create more engaged staff and we do an internal campaign. How many more of our staff is engaging and positive about the brand? That is organizational performance. And the 2020 update is where we should look at outcomes and impact, but it should be identified for stakeholders, society, and the organization. We cannot just look at ourselves in isolation any longer, and it's actually very dangerous. So if we do something, what is the possible outcome and impact, not just on us, but on the environment around us? So we've looked at what outcomes were, but what is the impact? Now, impact is a much longer term kind of effect. You don't publish an article today and tomorrow you've got an impact because you published one article. It is possible, but probably highly unlikely. So impact could be an increase in sales or an increased reputation. I know the South African blood donor service are very low on blood, so they're obviously running campaigns now. Are they meeting those targets which they need, and how do you measure that? It could be cost savings or staff retention. That is a longer term kind of impact which we need to look at. And I've got these examples of maybe some campaigns where they didn't really consider the societal kind of impact. So you will remember that when Black Lives Matter started trending a few years ago, Pepsi launched a campaign where Kendall Jenner, who's, if I'm not mistaken, one of the Kardashians, was used in the campaign, and she was handing out Pepsis to the American cops, and all was happy and flowery and all of that, except that campaign blew up hugely in their faces, because everyone said, well, we tried this and the cops didn't like it and beat us up. So that was a bit of a faux pas on their side. You think it's a great campaign, but then it blows up in your face. And I mean, even Ornico had a similar kind of disaster just a few months ago. We normally do the social media landscape research, which we present once a year with Arthur Goldstuck, who's obviously a very big tech expert in South Africa. And this year we decided obviously to do it different, because normally it would be a live event and you would have to buy the research, which is quite a hefty piece of work, about 100 pages worth of research. And this year we roped in quite a few extra research partners like Ask Africa and Digital and other partners. And we decided to make the report free. So you don't no longer needed to pay for it. You could just get it for free. And obviously we had an online event with these partners. But the next thing, we got nailed on social media, because look at the diversity of the panel. And I mean, it's something we didn't even consider. Next thing, this is a massive crisis, which we needed to jump on immediately and resolve. And luckily, within a day or two, we managed to get the whole panel restructured. We had Sylvester, who was one of our critics, also joining the panel. And what eventually turned out to be a massively successful event with hundreds of people attending online, and we created over 800 leads from this experience. So you need to sort of keep all this possible impact in mind. Originally in 2010, Principle 4, media measurement requires quantity and quality. So where we are today, communication measurement and evaluation should include both qualitative and quantitative analysis. Very important. You need to count things, but you need to look at the quality as well. So for instance, when we look at the quantitative, yes, there were 634 media items, so many thousands of Twitter mentions and visitor websites. But how does it qualitative look? What is the topics about of the conversations? What is the sentiment about these topics? Even looking at the reputational pillars, are they talking about the brand's financials, product, services, vision, leadership, staff, and workplace? So you need to sort of look at all of this kind of qualitative research as well. Then my favorite principles, AVEs are not the value of public relations in 2010. That was changed to AVEs are not the value of communication in 2015, and this one stayed exactly the same. This was not updated. In the links, which I'll share with you, there's also research pieces that you can go and read about the reasons why AVEs are a discredited measurement and why it's quite dangerous to use it. And I think the long and the short of it is price is what you pay, value is what you get. So an AVE is a measure of cost. That's how much it would have cost you to buy that space in the media. It's got nothing to do with the value that your brand gets out of it or not. I always try and explain cost versus value is if I buy a Dora the Explorer DVD for 50 Rand, the cost is 50 Rand, but the peace and quiet I get from my daughter is thousands. So you can't equate cost and value. If you look at a global demand, and this is specifically for our MEC clients, like we said, we've got clients in 86 countries, so it's thousands of clients. When the principles were initially established in 2010, 80% of them still demanded AVEs. And if we look at last year's figures, this has dropped to 13%. Now, if you look at other research pieces like ECO, the International Communications Consultancy Organization, you will find that in certain areas like the Middle East and even in Africa, AVEs are still quite popular, but the demand is dropping quite considerably, particularly once clients realize that it's really meaningless for them and they need to look out for these better measurement principles. And I'll show you a practical example, just what happened this year. We know that a lot of iconic magazines and even newspapers closed down. People Magazine, Cosmopolitan, Garden and Home, a lot of these titles that's household names in South Africa disappeared after decades. And the whole media landscape is changing. So let's look at this example of a rate card, because remember an AVE is based on a rate card. If you look at a full page in the Huisgenoot, which is a very popular, one of the most popular magazines in South Africa, you will see it will cost you 97,000 Rand to buy an ad there. So if you had a full page article there, you could claim an AVE of 97,000. But let's look at another Media 24, because Huisgenoot's a Media 24 print title. This is some of their digital rate cards. And I mean, you can look at it, 320 Rand, 290 Rand. And a lot of the online stuff works on clicks rather than, the full pages. So immediately you can go from a 97,000 Rand for a print publication to the same item in a popular online site, and suddenly your AVE drops to 320. What we need to keep in mind and I looked at the distribution and circulation figures for the third quarter just yesterday, publications like the Sunday Times has dropped 50% within a year, their circulation rates. As circulation rates drops and you can reach a smaller audience, your rate cards need to go down as well, which automatically means an AVE will go down eventually and probably eventually disappear. So those are just some of the obvious pitfalls from an AVE kind of perspective. This is quite an interesting change for me. If we look at Principle 6, social media can and should be measured. This was back in 2010. Everyone knew Twitter and Facebook and all of those were popular, but I said we should measure it, and it can be measured. And then in 2015, we said social media can and should be measured consistently with other channels, but now it's been updated to holistic communication, measurement, and evaluation. It includes all relevant online and offline channels. So it's not just traditional media and social media, but you can also look at other channels, emails. How is that being opened by clients, or how are they interacting with it? Event attendance. There's a lot of things that we can measure. It doesn't just need to be social and traditional. And I think those of you not familiar with the PESO model, which is paid, earned, shared, owned media, which has become quite popular in the last few years, as the media landscape changes, you need to keep this in mind. So earned media is typically our media relations, where we've traditionally sent out a media release to the big newspapers or broadcast channels. But it's also like blogger relations. Shared media is more where audience members share your content on platforms like Facebook or Twitter, LinkedIn and YouTube. Own media looks at your own website or your own newsletter or your podcast or your own social channel. So this is your own media. Obviously these days a lot of brands have awesome websites that don't need the mass media to carry their messages for them any longer. And then obviously paid media, which is really advertising. As we've seen through the years, the platforms are monetizing. So if you're just doing a little post and hope it will get a lot of traction, it's not going to happen. The platforms want you to pay for it. So you need to look at this sort of mix and even add to this. And I'll share this little bit of research I did earlier this year with a brand, just to show you how dangerous it can be to look at measurement in isolation. This particular brand only received social media monitoring from us, which is represented by the blue line. And then I also analyzed their traditional media coverage by the dark blue line. So we noticed a spike here sort of between the 17th and the 21st of the month. So I thought, okay, obviously they did a campaign here, and it's a good use of social media to amplify the traditional campaign. But when I looked at it, it was actually totally the opposite. The traditional media coverage spike happened because they did a big donation for a CSI initiative, and they donated millions of rands. But when I looked at the social media, none of the social media mentioned it, because they happened to launch a competition where if you swiped your card, you could get a free packet of chips or something on the same day. Now, obviously what happened here is they've got a different social agency and then a communications or PR agency, and the two of them don't speak. So both of them launch campaigns on the same time, which works against each other, instead of using the two to lift each other. And then even at the end of the month, we'll see another spike. And what happened here was a hippo kept on visiting one of their outlets. Now, this got very wide media coverage. I picked this up even in as far as field as Egypt and Algeria, particularly in South African media. And a lot of people were talking about it on social media. There was not one single message from the brand interacting about this. This was a great missed opportunity where they could have, because it was a very goodwill story and well received, where they could have amplified a nice brand campaign. But you miss all of this if you just look at it in isolation. And then our final principle, when we started in 2010, it said transparency and replicability are paramount to sound measurement. And today we say communication, measurement, and evaluation are rooted in integrity, and transparency, and drive learning and insights. Now, the important thing to take note here is we need to be aware of our own biases, our own measurement biases. We need to look at ethical considerations, particularly issues such as the GDPR, POPI in South Africa, the Cambridge Analytica debacle a few years back has caused, obviously, a lot of the platforms, particularly Facebook and through Facebook, Instagram, and all of that, to close up a lot of previously available data because they got, seriously roasted in the US Congress because of people's data leakage and all of that. And I think even if we look at just recent developments, like I said, a lot of the platforms have been forced to close up data, so it's not readily available to brands or researchers any longer. There's issues like copyright, which is huge overseas. We're still very lucky in South Africa, but there's a lot of considerations that needs to be taken into account. As ad revenue for a lot of the media houses has disappeared, a lot of them has now moved to paywall content. And I know we monitor a lot of this content and we're allowed to monitor it, but we're not allowed to distribute it to hundreds of people. It's against the law. Even what people don't realize, if you email a scan of a newspaper article in your organization and you email it to 50 people, you are liable to pay copyright 50 times. Now, obviously the guys can't police it, but that is really what the law says. And even measurement biases. I had an interesting conversation last year in the Czech Republic with one of Facebook's data scientists. And this is what they mean by measurement bias. Because Facebook shows you a like button and you can see how many likes there are, now you start measuring it because it's easy and you don't look at other stuff. And so maybe you measuring the wrong things, which is quite dangerous as well if you don't look at what you need to look at. And then I think the biggest thing about measurement is what people approach it as is to show the proof and of what they've done and the value of what they've done. The biggest value in proper measurement is that you take learnings out of it, even if it was a failure, but to make sure that you don't do it again and do a better approach next time. And I'll show you a good example of some research we did a few years back as well. Now, this particular brand had a big event and they managed a great coup and got 702 on board as a media partner, which is great. I mean, obviously 702 is a hugely popular station. But when we started digging into how they were reporting on it and we compared it to other channels, you'll see here on the right, they don't even feature on the top 5 broadcast channels on the number of facts which they reported. So the brand wanted certain key messages out. You can see in this example, KykNet and SABC had a certain average amount of facts, but 702 does not even feature here. And when we dug a bit deeper, we realized 702 was talking a lot about 702, not necessarily about what the brand was trying to achieve. And if we look at the traffic on the left here, you'll see a minuscule amount of traffic was brought by 702 to their website. So they're not delivering the facts and they're driving very little traffic. So is this really the right media partner to have at the end of the day? And the next year, they signed up different media partners with better results. So this is the kind of learnings you need to get out of measurement. Now, because a lot of people find it obviously difficult to put this into practice, what AMEC did was to launch the integrated evaluation framework a few years ago. And it really boils down to the fact that us as communicators and public relations people always try and reinvent the wheel. If you look at the dominant approach to performance alignment in any organization, it's a sort of a project management approach. So you're going to start with an objective. I want to build a hospital in 5 years. What is the inputs? Okay, I'm going to need a budget. I'm going to need suppliers. How do I do it? And eventually, and we need to approach our PR campaigns, our communications campaigns in a similar kind of fashion. And this is what the framework makes it easy for you to do. So I'm going to quickly click through to the framework here. Let's hope you can still see it. So I hope you can. If you're not, just give me a shout. So the framework is really an online tool, and it's free, and it can work for a single individual's projects or a massive organization. You can have a whole year's strategic objectives in here, or a very specific small campaign. Doesn't matter, the flow works for it. And what's nice about it, and once again, just to reiterate the huge adoption across the world, if you go to the framework, you'll see there's obviously an introduction, there's the actual framework, there's a lot of supporting material and resources, and you can view it in various amounts of languages. So you can even go to Chinese if you want. You've got Russian, we've even got Thai and Arabic. So it's really a massive international effort to promote this. And if we go to the framework now, I'll open an example here on how to use it. So obviously I've populated this one. You'll see it shows you objectives, inputs, activities, outputs, outtakes, outcomes, and impact. So it forces you to plan properly. So we'll start here by objectives. Firstly, we need to know what is the organizational objectives, because our communication objectives needs to align with that. It doesn't help if the organization is trying to achieve a specific objective, but we're talking about something totally different. So in this case, what I've done is this project was to create a website for Ornico with very specific objectives. So the website is the communications tool, and we're setting it up to meet the organizational objectives. So we had very specific objectives here: increase sales by 30% for the analysis, and rest of Africa sales for 30%. So what we're going to do, we're going to build a website. There's some specific, very specific objectives which we identified here, and which then aligns with that. And if you don't know what to do, there's lots of information buttons which you can refer to. And then we'll look at our inputs. Now, what do we need? Who's our target audience? So obviously we want to speak to PR agencies in South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, and then also brands operating in Nigeria and Kenya. What is our inputs? We have some basic measurements. Well, what is our current website ranking at the moment? 96% from our visitors come from South Africa with this kind of bounce rate. How many leads are we currently getting? What is the average leads? And how much do we need to create? This was our sales for the previous years. So this is our benchmarks. Once again, if you need any kind of information here on what to do, you can just click the information buttons and it will help you. Then we look at our activities. Okay, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to build a new website, and we've got a budget of 100,000 Rand, and it's an owned media project. We'll do our own copy for the website, the graphic design. I just need to do the technical designs. We will do some media releases, which we'll send to BizCom, Marklifts, and quite a few other international media. We'll do a creative case study on the banking industry in Nigeria. We'll do one for Kenya. Then we'll promote these through paid campaigns. We'll look at Google Analytics on the website, and we'll do an AdWords campaign, but we'll even go and visit 20 clients a month to show them the new website. So these are our activities. Then our outputs. Okay, we've done the website. It was built in time frame and the budget. We created, sent the media releases. They did appear on BizCom. We had 50,000 opportunities to see and 500 clicks through to the release. The same on Mark Lives, a little bit less. The Niger news was not published because they expect you to pay them for editorial content. But Management Kenya print magazine had it. Our campaign's been running. We've been seeing all those people. So this is our outputs. This is what, and once again, as I mentioned before, your information buttons if you need extra assistance. Outtakes and outcomes, I find, is a bit complex for most people, so we can actually just use outcomes. The reality, an outtake is the sort of beginning of the outcome, and the actual outcome is the end of the outcome. But people find it too complex, so I recommend just to look at the outcomes specifically. So obviously you're not going to be able to know this, when you start with your objectives. You'll only maybe see this 6 months later, or depending on what your time frame is. But now we can see our lead generation increased by 100%. Our conversion also improved because we're getting better leads now. Our traffic from South Africa is 80% now versus the previous 96%, which is great because we've managed to increase our Nigeria and Kenya traffic, which was our objectives. Now we can also, after a year, check how much did our sales increase. So we did increase our sales for the rest of Africa, and we increased our sales for analysis, although we didn't achieve the 30% increase we wanted. And then our impacts, eventually we did increase sales as per the organization's objectives. Due to surpassing the rest of Africa targets, we are now employing more people there. There's increased visibility to prospective clients. We had a new salesperson appointed in Lagos due to the increased interest, and we could actually calculate a return on investment in monetary terms, because that is what people always ask, and I'll show you a few examples of this. So that is really the framework. You need to go and play with it and see if if it works for you. It is very easy to use. There is help around all the way. There's a lot of resources. I mean, even if you look at the taxonomy, it will tell you all the kind of things you can look at. And I think that is what scares a lot of people. You see so many options, then you think you need to use all of it, or you need to use all 7 of the principles. Just make sure you use a few of that. I mean, there's no point in measuring likes if that's not what you're trying to achieve. So you need to align the measurements you use to what your objectives are at the end of the day. So yeah, I mean, I'm gonna send you the link to this. You can go and play with it, and then you're most welcome to come back to me with questions. Now let's get back to return on investment. There's only one formula for return on investment. This is a financial term, and it's a business term that's been in use for hundreds of years, and this is the formula. Your return on investment is either to increase your revenue or to make savings. So I'm spending money to increase my revenue or to make savings. I minus that of my investment and divide it by my investment. So in this case, we could track our increase in sales for both Africa and analysis was 1.8 million. My cost was 100,000 Rand for the website, plus 60,000 Rand for AdWords, and then the promoted campaigns was 4,000. So my investment was 164,000. So if I take the 1.8 million minus the 164,000, divide by the 164,000, you get a return on investment of every rand you spent, you got 10 rand and 10 cents back. And you can also convert this to a percentage and multiply it by 100. So in this case, you had really a 1,000% return on investment. And that is how you calculate return on investment. There is two schools of thought in communications measurement, is that ROI the one school is only financial, but the other school believes you can also have a non-financial return on investment. So I sort of agree with the second school of thought, because your objective is not always just to make a monetary return on investment. If you're the Department of Health and your objective is to get people to smoke less, that will be your main objective, and you need to say, I'm going to spend R1 million, but for that I want 1 million people to stop smoking. So, but it's quite easy actually once you get the hang of it. Other great tools, and I'm also going to share this with you, is the Measurement Maturity Mapper, which was developed about 2 years ago. It's really a crowdsourced kind of tool, and it's a diagnostic tool where you can register and complete a questionnaire. And then what it does, it shows you how you compare against the benchmark in your business size. Now, whether you're a big government organization or a small PR company, if you select that in the questionnaire, it will benchmark you against similar kind of companies. So in this case, we can see from a reporting perspective, the benchmark is 49%, but me as a respondent are sitting at 23%. Whereas impact, only 43% of the benchmark is very good at demonstrating that. I'm only 11% along this journey. And the greatest thing about this, at the end of this process, it gives you recommendations. So it will show you what it thinks your strengths are. So in reporting, we identify and track topics and themes on social media. That's a strength. You do that. So what can you do to improve it? So, okay, you can do it more frequently. You can do more frequent evaluation of paid media. So it gives you a lot of recommendations based on what you've entered from the questionnaire perspective. So it's an absolutely great tool. And now for our last session, it's quite complex, take everything in, but hopefully some of these case studies, which I'll run through quickly, will give you practical examples. We'll start off with one which was shared with us at AMEC about 3 months ago from Visit Britain. I did this one because I worked with Brand SA on a presentation the other day. I thought it would be nice to share how the British do it. And they've got a very big landscape. They've got 22 main markets overseas which they're targeting. There's a lot of government agencies. There's different tourism bodies. There's different cities. There's obviously the airlines. There's big global brands like the Premier League. And obviously there's the media and influencers. So it's a very big landscape. So this is what they looked like before they started their measurement journey. Print and broadcast was their main media, and that's where they focused on. There was no process for dealing with influencers. It was very broad. So they would only really approach media with the highest reach, audience reach. So their main measures of success were reach figures and advertising value equivalent. And PR was very much a standalone channel, not integrated into other planning processes and paid channels. And then they decided, okay, let's try from the beginning. What are we trying to achieve? We want to grow the value of tourism, and we want to drive this value across Britain. And can we show how our activities are doing that? And what is the main measures of success? How will success look like for us? So what I eventually decided, and this is worth looking at the left corner here, what their main key performance indicators are now. They only measure these 4 things. Firstly, 90% of their coverage needs to be in their top target publication. So that is who they are targeting, their top tier media. So they're not worried about getting coverage in other media channels. 90% of it should be in what they've identified. 50% of all coverage needs to include a call to action. Click here to book a place at McGregor's Hotel in Edinburgh, for instance. Is that message in there? 90% of coverage to contain a minimum of one of the visibility key messages. So what is our key message that we want to tell? So 90% of that coverage needs to contain that key message, and 100% of coverage outputs to align with the market targets for delivery of growth for each region. So they measure all their coverage around these 4 KPIs now to make sure, is there a call to action? Something needs to happen. You need to drive a tourist to a booking. And when he clicks on the booking and he makes a payment and you can track it back, then you're really proving your value. And I mean, they even driving coverage to their own Visit Britain online shop, you know, where they actually sell stuff, which is great. So really the evolution was from broad targeting to very specific tiered media, where the public relations function was very much a standalone channel. It's now fully aligned to inspire consumers and drive towards conversion so that they can get a return on investment. Where reach and AVEs were their main measures of success, they use their 4 global KPIs now. And where they just looked at print and broadcast, they now work with social media and very much with influencers to drive that key messages and to really drive people to book and to book tours and accommodation. A great case study is also from China. A few years back, if you think we've got a lot to do with social, they have got hundreds and hundreds of channels. But what they did was Givenchy noticed that an influencer on WeChat called @bags had quite a big fan base, and he kept on posting about bags, and he had quite a big reach, and they analyzed his audience and saw that it very much aligned to their brand target audience. So what did they do? They didn't pay him thousands and thousands of dollars or one to tweet pictures about their brand or their bags. They created very much a custom bag specifically for him. They didn't pay him, they created this bag, which would only be available on his WeChat channel. I don't think it's a particularly pretty bag, baby pink, but they created 80 of these bags. You could only get it on his channel. And when it was launched, all 80 bags were sold within 12 minutes for $175,000 US. There's your main measurements. I had this influencer, I didn't pay him because obviously getting a bag custom made for him is hugely ego boosting. But they sold all 80 bags in 12 minutes for $175,000. There's your main measurements. Very successful campaign. And then lastly, I'll finish off with another one of my own examples. For many years, we sponsored the Ad Forum event. It probably ran for about 10 years, where once every quarter, a lot of advertising industry experts would come together. We'd look at a lot of ads for a particular category. They would discuss the ads, people would vote on it. And it was quite popular. Now, obviously, due to our sponsorship and our deal, this was through the old TISA Media, which is now Arena Holdings, they gave us quite a lot of coverage. You know, there's ads on banners, on the websites, which we got, even articles in the Financial Mail, discuss it, so quite valuable. I mean, I did the research, so the sponsorship for 3 events a year was about 120,000 Rand. But we had to compile, obviously, the show reels plus the research. And in time, that came to about 80,000 Rand. So total cost for the year in financial cost plus time cost about 200,000 Rand. So I started looking at attendeeship at these events. So I looked at the previous 2 years. So I saw in 2018 we had 107 people attend, and in 2019 115 for the financial services event. So that grew. But if we look at telecoms and automotive, you know, that went down dramatically. And if you look at the total figures for the year, it's also down. Now I could do a lot of estimates here. So obviously in 2019 it was a bit more expensive than the previous year. I look at the attendees, how much are we spending? And I realized in 2018 it cost us 666 Rand per attendee. And in 2019, 869 per person. The best value was financial services at 579 per person. And the worst value was telecoms for at more than 1,000 Rand. So obviously our learning is we're not going to present telecoms again. Now let's compare the 200,000 Rand which it's cost us, because for the same amount of money, I can buy one flighting of an ad on SABC1. You'll notice to have one flighting for 30 seconds was 200,000 Rand. But I've got 8.5 million viewers. I can calculate the cost per 1,000, and I can calculate, so to reach one person on SABC1 for one ad would cost me 2 cents. Now compare that against the cost for my event. For me to reach an average person there, it's 870 Rand versus 2 cents on to advertise on SABC1. But now we need to keep in mind, if I spend the 200,000 Rand on SABC1, I'm not going to probably reach one of my intended target audiences. So I'd rather spend the 870 Rand and get exactly the right audience members there which I can engage with. So let's look at what happened. I mean, in this scenario, due to the sponsorship, we could link up the agencies which signed up for us for services. So we had one at 180,000 Rand for the year, 240, and one's offered 250. So I know now my sales attributed to the event is 670,000. My cost is 200,000. We do our return on investment ratio. And I can calculate that for every Rand I spent, I got 2.35 Rand back, or 235% return on investment. But let's look at this scenario, because this is most probably what is happening. I only signed up one client for 24,000 Rand, but it cost me 200,000 Rand. And if I look at my return on investment, then for every Rand I spent, I actually lost 88 cents. And that's the mistake a lot of us in communications make. We think every effort that we do helps. It helps build the brand, or it's important. We need to make sure that it is, because not every investment is a good investment. If you look at Steinhoff a few years back and how that collapsed. And that is where we sometimes make the mistake. We need to make sure that we get a return on investment, not just assume. But I think if I compare that to the advertising value equivalent we got through the free media coverage, which was 550,000 Rand, we'll see that that's got no relation to the actual kind of financials and the value of the event that we had once we start looking at it differently. And that's really the long and the short of it. The reality, it's a journey, this measurement journey. Like I said in the beginning, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? But take those little steps. You don't need to jump into the deep end immediately. If you use an AVE, AMEC is really advocating big time against AVEs, but we're not advocating to ban it. Whereas a lot of the international PR associations wants to actually ban the use of it for their membership. We want to take a more educational kind of approach. So if you're using AVEs and that's what you use, to start adding some other kind of measurements, and every month or every quarter start looking at additional kind of elements, and you'll start seeing how much value you can find if you start measuring the right stuff. But it is a journey. As I also mentioned, this is your homework. Hopefully, you know, I could show some highlights of certain things which you found interesting, or maybe which you didn't think about before. But in my opinion, I think the biggest step, if you're not doing it, the biggest problem we find is that campaigns are not planned properly. There's not a very specific objective. Measurement is not something which happens after you've done something. It happens before, during, and after. What is your benchmarks? What are you trying to achieve? What is the problem that I want to change? And how do I want to change it? How's that success going to look like to me? How do I adjust my campaign once it runs? I've been using 702, but that's maybe not the best option for me. Rather, I should email people. And then afterwards, take those learnings and see how we can do better the next time. As I mentioned, I'm going to share these links to a lot of these things I've shown you. It's all free except for the online college, which obviously has a tuition fees attached to it. And go play with it, and you know, you will start seeing what a dramatic change this can actually mean to your campaigns. And it's really a journey. Start slowly, start easily, but start. You don't have a choice. So yes, there's been some questions. Will we be able to get a copy of this webinar? Yes, you can. We've recorded the session I did last week, and we're also recording this one. So you can either contact